Yes, the unmistakable sound of the 808. Well, actually not the 808, the Tr-08, the Roland Tr-08. I'm Gaz Williams, this is Sonic Lab, and we are looking at this boutique drum machine today. So, Roland, the Tr-808, the original drum machine, everyone knows it, came out in 1980, one of the first programmable drum machines, has now made it into the boutique format. Why they didn't call it the 808? I don't know, but it's called the Tr-08, and it follows on from last year's Tr-09, which was the recreation of the 909, which was the successor of the 808. So it's all a little bit in reverse, but it's nice that it's here. And what we've got essentially is a very accurate recreation of the original drum machine. Now, the sounds of this drum machine have been used, well, it's almost like the basis of like hip hop and dance music. The influence of this drum machine cannot be overstated. So Roland bringing this out now is going to be under some serious scrutiny. Now, in a direct comparison with an 808, with an original 808, it may lack a certain something. There's maybe a little bit more heft possibly with the original one, but there are certain little hidden features within the 08 which go some way to kind of getting that back. Personally, having used this for a while now, I think it sounds great to use. It sounds and feels very analog to use, so I wouldn't get too hung up about the absolute accuracy of it. It certainly sounds close enough. And once you start to twiddle with the sounds, it feels alive. It feels like it's got real tone and real quality to it. So the 808, as I mentioned, came out in 1980 and was a fully programmable drum machine. So it wasn't just so you could program your own beats in, you can program complete songs in. And therein lies one of the things about this boutique, which is quite special, is that unlike the sounds, which I'm sure many of you have got the 808 sounds in countless different formats as it's come out in sample libraries and other drum machines, what makes the boutique special is it recreates the complete workflow of the original, including the whole way that you do it. These little switches, for instance, are all about triggering variations and fills and things like that. Bearing in mind, this came out in 1980 before a lot of the music that the 808, which is associated with, was even kind of in existence. So it was maybe marketed for a completely different music that it eventually got more, used within. Now, let's have a look at this. Like all boutiques, this one is in the optional dock, which is the DK01. That's an extra about 50 quid, so really expensive, extravagant thing. However, it does give you this, it gives you a few different angles. I've got it in the mid angle here. Around the back, like with all boutiques, we've got MIDI on DIN plugs, which I really like. Audio, sadly, on little mini jacks, but it's okay, I guess, with a headphone out and a line out, plus there's a mix in. The mix in allows you, if you've got other like boutiques, maybe just so you can pass the sound through. There's volume control, and there's a USB, which is providing power, and also is connected to my Mac, and we'll look at that later because this has got some rather cool audio functionality over that USB. Now, like all the other boutiques, well, I think all of them, maybe all but one, you can run these on batteries, and there is a little speaker inside it too, albeit a very tinny, not particularly useful one, but it's nice that it's there. So I've actually found sitting on the sofa and twiddling and programming songs with just a pair of headphones in there running on batteries, actually really quite enjoyable. So I wouldn't underestimate the battery side of it. Yeah. Nice build quality. Initially, I thought these switches were a little bit, there's a little bit of like side-to-side movement in them, but when you use them, they feel pretty good actually. The knobs, albeit small, very small, are good though, and you can dial in sounds. Now, I've got MIDI'd up, I've got the Arturia key step MIDI'd out, and the reason I've got that is to show that the sounds can be triggered. And one of the things, over MIDI, all of the sounds in the 808 are accessible over MIDI. From the front panel, as this is a recreation of the original, things like the congas are either congas or toms. It's either the claves or the rim shot, the maracas or the hand clap, etc. But over MIDI, all of those sounds are accessible. However, over MIDI, it doesn't appear that you can actually record patterns in. Pattern programming is very much a programming thing. And unlike other drum machines, the 808 isn't something that you can play the sounds on. You really have to program it. So with that in mind, let's have a little look about what programming the 808 actually involves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into pattern write, and there's what first part or second part. That basically means you could have a 16 step if you just use one part, but if you wanted a longer pattern, you could go into the second part. So you could have, you know, if you wanted a 20 step pattern, you would use 4 steps of the second part. So that's why you've got a first and second part, and that's not to be confused with the variation, the A and B variation. That's like 2 separate versions which you can toggle between or leave the thing in the middle and it'll alternate. That's quite nice as a way of being able to do like a 2-bar pattern and be able to program pattern 1, program pattern 2, etc. But let's have a look now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an empty pattern, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use this bank button. Now this isn't on the original one because the original one was just the original one bank, if you will. But here, this allows me to pick banks. I'm going to go up and grab 11, 1. I'm going to probably have an empty pattern here. Here we go, empty pattern. So the way we do it, instrument select. I'm going to go say kick drum. Let's just do the classic 4 on the floor. Now, my tempo at the moment is connected because I'm connected to the computer. I can't change the tempo because I'm synchronized to the computer's tempo. But let's see, I've got my 4 on the floor going. I can now go, let's add a snare. I'm just going to do a bog standard beat for a minute. Move this over, closed hi-hats, and so forth. You get the gist of it. You select, and then one of the major things is the accent. So I'm going to put an accent on 1, and I'll crank that up, and an accent, let's say, okay, and so forth. And you can get the gist of it. We've seen this kind of sort of step programming many times before, and therefore, you know, you get the gist of it. That's what you do. Like, so I've got my pattern, like that, like basic pattern. If I wanted to copy it from pattern 1 into pattern 2, then it's like a bit counterintuitive. But what I have to do is I have to select the pattern I want it to go into. I then hold tap, which is a copy. I then choose, I want pattern 1, and then I hit start, and that's copied it across. So it's a little bit weird that you do it, you almost do it in reverse nowadays. But there we go, that's emulating that old workflow. So we just have to go with it. But I think that's one of the things I actually really enjoy. Similarly with these, you know, these fills, you know, when you're playing something and you trigger fills in, I found that actually doing real-time song creation is actually a lot of fun. And I think this might be something that people might overlook. I think people might want to get this just to have a very good version of those sounds, but I think the actual workflow is so enjoyable and entertaining once you've got your head around it. I think don't overlook that. Okay, what else we've got on here though, I should mention, there is a mini jack out on the top here, and that's a trigger out. So that'll send out an audio click. So you could put that into your Euro rack or other things that accept a trigger output. And there's a button here, and that button allows us then just to advance the sequence in trigger pulses, which is nice. What else is on here? Well, there is this secret button on the right, and this kind of opens up some of the turbo functions or some of the secret functions that are specific to this boutique version. As I mentioned, all of the front panel, apart from a couple of small buttons, is identical to the original. This little button, on the other hand, though, this gives us some extra functionality. On the first option is compression. That's only available to, well, we see lit up now, number 2, number 3. These numbers relate to the instrument select. So number 2 is bass drum, number 1 is actually accents. So we don't have compression on an accent, that would be silly. But if I wanted to put compression on the kick, I select number 2, and then I can just, oops, not that, turn the value up here, and I can, and this conveniently lets me hear the sound as I press it too. Okay, so you get compression. What else do you get? You get gain, so you can add extra gain it'll go up a range from 0 to 200. So if you want to sort of add more gain than that's available on the knobs, you can do that. What else we've got? Tuning. And the tuning is interesting because as we notice on the top panel, some of the drums have tuning and some don't. So the drums that don't have a tuning top panel, you can get to it via this menu. So for instance, the kick, I always thought the kick had a tuning, but it doesn't. It has a tone and a decay, but via this, it allows you to play with the tuning. So if I was to play the kick now like so, I could tune it down. Speaking of the kick, one of the functions as well, if I just quickly flick through these options, it comes to BD, and what there is, and this is a really cool little thing, we can choose whether we have, at the moment it's set to normal, but if I turn this, it goes to long decay. And this long decay function is something that I think it was a mod that people would have done, but it certainly gives that sound that we know and love so much from a bass drum. That big, deep boom. So that's nice that they've put that little function in there. But back into that menu though, compression gain, decay, pan allows us to choose panning destinations. Again, these are things which weren't on the original. Mind you, the original did have audio outputs for each drum sound. And there's a few other things where you get your MIDI channels sync and a few other little bits and bobs, including one thing I should mention, which is you can change the way the composer works. In its default, it'll work like an 808, but you can make it also work like a 909. And that basically means when you're writing a pattern, you can choose to use it either in the 808 way, you'd basically do a performance and it'll record the performance in terms of where all the fills and everything happen. But the 909 way is you would choose a pattern, add the pattern, choose a pattern, so it's like a step time way of putting in all the patterns. So they allow you to modify which way you want to work, which I think is pretty cool because both ways have got, you know, valid uses for. Okay, so that's our little menu there. A few other little things is, there's a little sub-step feature, and this is quite nice, and this is something that's quite easy to miss. So if I get a little pattern on the go here, let's just make that pattern repeat itself, and pull that back a little bit. So in the snare, pick some snares. So that little fill at the end here, if I do sub-steps, I can put steps in between. So now you can hear, that allows you to get a little bit more action going on. It's really cool with hi-hats as well, so you can get those really fast little hi-hats. Again, that wasn't something that was available on the original. So these little, it gives you the exact workflow, if you will, if that's what you want, but it also gives you these extra little these little extra bits and bobs, which allow you just to sort of make your patterns just that bit more interesting. So what we have here then is, in my opinion, an excellent emulation of the original. As I say, the extra functionalities let you kind of get loads of extra little subtle tonal variations that weren't available on the original, but I think it's close enough. I think, if you're worried about absolute sort of detail and it being exactly the same as the original, I think it's close enough. I think you don't need to worry about that. But I mentioned earlier, one of the really sort of professional features of this is the ability to output audio over USB. And in this case, this outputs 12 channels of USB. And that allows you to capture every sound and a mix at the same time. I've got a Cubase project loaded up and I've made a template. So in this project, I've got all of the channels routed already, so we can see if we look. I'm going to go to my kick channel here, and I've named all of the channels in the Cubase kind of input editor. So I've created a template. Okay, so with all the channels in record, I'm going to press record. Here's a little song I've put together. that'll do for now. And then what we can see is that all the channels are all recorded, and some are a little bit hot, but if I could dial those back, and whatever the settings are on the panel will be reflected by the way it's recorded. So actually this is brilliant. This means that in one go we can grab all of the channels on separate individual tracks and can be processed separately, and you know, that's a really nice thing. But also it gives you a mix as well. So if you wanted to, you could just set up the mix channel and just grab it all in a single mix. But what's also quite nice is there's a feature which allows you to choose which drums you want within the mix as well, in that stereo mix here. So decent functionality there for using it. However, to use it as like an audio interface has got certain limitations, like you can't adjust the balance of the playback and the monitor. So the way I'd probably recommend that you used it, if you wanted to use it with your computer, is to use it to set up an aggregate device, which you can do in Mac, and I think you can do it in with a PC, but I don't know how. But yeah, with a Mac it's quite easy to do. So you could have an aggregate of your sound card plus this, and I think that would be the best way to use it in this situation. But what about the hand claps? That's what I know a lot of you will be wondering. Well, the good things about the hand claps is you do have that secret facility like I was showing. On the top panel of the 808, the only function that you had with the hand clap is the level control. Now, again, I can't trigger the sounds directly unless I go into this secret little menu here, and I'm going to pan across until I get to tune. And now let's see. Now I can see that my hand claps are number 8. So I'll play number 8. And let's just see what we can do now if we tune them down. So yes, they go pretty low. You know, so the amount that you can change the sounds is fairly limited, but I guess the idea of this though isn't to be a jack of all trades or to try and be a particularly, versatile unit. The idea of it is to simulate the 808. So these are little bonuses. So I think what it sets out to do, I think it does really admirably. In fact, I'd go as far to say this is one of the best of the boutiques that I've played with so far, just in terms of it being very satisfying. The basic sounds, you can see why the 808 is like maybe the most famous drum machine of all time. The sounds are ever so pleasing to use. Sure, they're not very realistic sounding. It does not sound like an acoustic kit, which it was trying to do in its day. And I think the 808s, it went from 1980 to 1983. 1983 or so, we started hearing more of the kind of like digital drums and basic sample drums started coming out then, and I think that made the 808 sound very antiquated and dated. Now, that was then. Now we've come to love those sounds, and these sounds are an enormously important palette of the music for the last sort of 30 years or so. Is it worth the money though? At £349, that seems a bit expensive in my opinion. I think it seems that, yes, it's very well built, it sounds great, it's got lots of great functionality, and as I mentioned, over USB, that certainly increases its professional applications. But it does seem a bit expensive when you consider the Tr-08, which is the bigger brother, which has the 909 and the 808 and a whole lot more, is only sort of about 60, 70 or 80 pounds more. And also, if you notice, last year's Tr-09, you see, you can get them for around £250 now. So I wonder whether this will, in time, come down to that price, which that seems to be the sweet spot for me there. So, maybe a little expensive right now, but definitely a brilliant, enjoyable and well-made recreation of one of Roland's total glorious products. That's it. I'm Gaz Williams. This has been Sonic Lab. See you soon.